Okay, can I just quickly confirm from the TRIPPIS coordinator, we're live and I can get going?
We're live.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you everybody for joining this session. You can see the title there, Water Storage, um, First Steps in Assessment, Progress Towards Incentives. I am Jonathan Lautzi from the International Water Management Institute, and this session is largely featuring a lot of work we're undertaking in the context of a 1CG program called Nexus Gains. There's also a number of other representatives from a number of other institutes involved in this session. You can see all the range of logos there on your screen, and we'll go into more depth on that in a couple of minutes. So once again, thanks for joining. Yeah, to give a bit of background on the concept, the kind of the reasoning for this session. So integrated water storage, there's a lot of attention to this now. The speaker that follows me, William Rex, will give more detail on why. But basically, there's growing recognition for the need for increasing water storage and doing so in more integrated ways, by which we mean not just thinking about gray infrastructure, but thinking about green. Again, there's growing, again, the rationale is can go on and on about this, but growing variability due to climate change, growing population, growing demand. There's clear-cut reasons for increasing water storage. Despite these clear-cut reasons and the strong rationale, that's not always been matched by practical investment in research and effort. So you can say it's a great big idea, but then realizing it, there's still progress to be undertaken. So there's a bit of a lag there. So in that context, Nexus Gains, the program I just flagged, this 1CG program, is really focused on this. It put a lot of investment into this as one of our key areas. Progress thus far means over the last year to year and a half, has centered around assessing water storage. And we've done some really groundbreaking work in around 5 key geographies to undertake integrated water storage assessments. And we'll get into what those mean in a couple minutes. And so that's where we are now. We're also starting to look forward and asking, well, how do we transition from these integrated assessments to fostering adoption and use? It's to strengthen planning and management based on all these different water storages that we're now understanding. So that's a bit of context on the session. So to drill down, the very specific objectives of this session is to present some of these first step efforts in integrated water storage assessment. And you see in the map on the screen, or to the right of your screen, there's 2 key case studies we're going to present. That's in the Shashe, which is in Southern Africa, and then the Ramganga, which is in the Ganges. And then so the first half of the session is going to focus on these 2 efforts as well as a rationale. And then the second half of the session is going to center on discussion, a panel discussion on how to motivate adoption and implementation of integrated water storage, how to get it into planning and management. To run through the agenda very quickly, I'm just giving a brief intro now, which I'll conclude in the next minute. I'm going to hand over to my colleague, William Rex from the World Bank, to expand on the rationale, why we need integrated water storage. And then, as I said, we're going to hear 2 case studies where we've actually assessed different storage types in particular geographies. Germa Ibrahim from IMI is going to present in the Shashe in Southern Africa, and then D.A. Batpuria is going to present in the Ramganga, which is in a basin in the Ganges. That's going to be the first half of our session. Then the second half of the session, we're going to transition over to a panel discussion, and we're going to try to learn from 3 examples which have helped transition towards realizing an integrated storage approach. So Kaushal Garg from ICRISAT is going to present an example. Marcus Hoffman from the Federation of Swedish Farmers are going to present and discuss an example, and then David Sarachera from IUCN. And that's going to be facilitated by Jenny Baron from the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. And then finally, at the very end, Stefan Uhlenbrook from the World Meteorological Organization will offer some final remarks and perspectives on what's been the focus of this session. I want to remind everybody it's a fairly ambitious program we're going to try to get through in the next 55 minutes. So please ask questions in an ongoing fashion in chat. So just don't hesitate, fire away in there. We're unlikely to have time for kind of traditional verbal questioning. So just place your questions in chat, and I would ask the speakers to just go straight away and respond to participants. Okay, thank you very much. Let me proceed to hand over to my colleague who's second on the agenda, William Rex. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. So as Jonathan said, I'm going to talk briefly about why integrated freshwater storage. And what you see is a few recent papers over the last couple of years from IMI, from GWP, from the World Bank, who are all talking about this concept of integrated water storage. And of course, we mean freshwater storage. So what do we actually mean by integrated? And the first thing to acknowledge is that there are many different forms of storage. Obviously, in the big picture, both built and natural storage, or green and gray, as many people like to say, but those take a great deal of different forms, as you can see from this graphic, and this is only partial. There are many, many sorts of storage. So partly we mean by integrated with integrating different types of storage, but we're also talking about different scales of storage. So some storage may be huge at the sort of big watershed or landscape scale. Other storage may be localized to a particular urban area. Other storage may be at the household level. So we're talking about many scales of storage. Thirdly, we're also talking about time. So we have in front of us a system of water storage where water is moving through it in different time scales as well as different physical scales. So sometimes water may be resident in a place really for a matter of minutes, hours, or days. Other times, such as around fossil groundwater, we may be talking thousands and thousands of years. And of course, that matters for the way that we think about actually managing that storage. So type, scale, and time, but we're also talking, I think, about different stakeholders. So perhaps there was a world once where it made sense for different stakeholders in the same environment to have their unique forms of storage that they would use for their purposes. But if we start to understand storage as an integrated system, it makes less and less sense to be thinking about how different stakeholders manage their own storage for their own purposes, because of course, fundamentally, it's all connected. It's connected hydrologically, but it's also connected economically, socially, and so forth. So if we have all of these wonderful forms of storage, what's the problem that we're trying to deal with when we're all talking about integrated storage? Well, the first one is obviously around demand. And world population doubling over the last 50 years or so is just one indicator of it. Of course, for each new person on Earth, it's not necessarily a linear relationship in terms of demand for water. As people get richer, they demand more different types of foodstuffs that may have bigger water footprints, et cetera, et cetera. So growing demand. The second thing is around supply. So we've lived as societies with natural storage for thousands of years. We've started to develop built storage a little more recently, but in some cases also literally for thousands of years. But the challenge that we're increasingly facing is as demand is increasing, supply is in fact decreasing. And the main reason for that is the degree of degradation of natural storage. And some of that is sort of obvious around climate change, the melting of ice sheets, mountain glaciers. Some of it is more anthropogenic, so the overpumping of groundwater impacts on lakes and soil moisture, natural wetlands. And I think what's illustrative, or what for me is very powerful about this graphic, is overall, despite the hundreds of billions of dollars that people have spent on trying to develop built storage over the last 50 years or so, we're still facing significant net loss of storage. So the decline in natural is much bigger than the increase in built. And finally, of course, the wild card here is the impact of climate change, which is upending the world's water cycle. It's impacting most obviously on variability, but also on temperature, and has consequences for floods, droughts, and all of those kind of things that we're all very familiar with. And so this combination of rising demand, climate change, and declining storage create the risk of a growing water storage gap. What do we mean by that? It's our perceived storage needs minus alternatives. So there are alternatives to storage depending on what you're trying to get out of it. So there are alternatives to hydropower, for example. There are alternatives to water in terms of supply, reuse, desal, and so on. And of course, minus available storage in the sense of, so what do we need and what do we already have? And the point here, as I said already, is that there are some alternatives that may relate to demand management or efficiency, alternative supply, substitutes for storage services, etc. And here it's useful to remind ourselves that when we're talking about integrated water storage, we are in fact talking about a subset of the broader field of integrated water resource management. Sorry. So a lot of the work that we've been doing over the last few years is trying to address this question of, well, if the gap is growing, what do we do about it? And this requires thinking differently. It's thinking differently about the way we approach success. So thinking, instead of focusing simply on storage volumes, to focus more on the outcomes. What are the services enabled by storage? In terms of approach, from built to natural and built and their interactions. In terms of how we manage storage, instead of focusing simply at the facility level, we need to be switching to focusing on the system level. How do we work across institutions? And in many cases, also across borders, be they internal borders or national borders. Storage development, from new development to getting more from the current set of storage. This could involve retrofitting, reoperation, rehabilitation, et cetera, et cetera. And finally, rethinking the way that we understand risk management, from infrastructure development to manage risk to diversification of storage types across storage systems to build robustness. My final slide is an attempt to bring it all together to say what we need to be focused on in the big picture when we talk about integrated storage is how we take these natural and built storage types, how they combine in natural, built, or most often hybrid storage systems at a variety of scales to provide the three core storage services we care about: increasing water availability, mitigating floods, and regulating flows for a variety of purposes and for a variety of sectors, whether it's agriculture, urban water supply, manufacturing and industry, hydropower, including enabling new renewables, transportation, environmental services, etc. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, William, for the great rationale there, why we need to expand and diversify storage, and to increase overall storage to achieve these range of services. Girma, have you uploaded it? Can we transition over to Girma Ibrahim from IMI, who's going to present the first of our two case studies on integrated water storage assessment, this one in the Shashe catchment within the Limpopo. Girma, over to you.
Can you see my screen, Jonathan?
Yes, we can.
Slideshow.
Okay. Yeah.
It's not slideshow now?
It's not on slideshow, no.
In mine, it's slideshow. I don't know. What about now?
No, maybe just go ahead with this because we can see your slide. It's just we can't see yeah, thanks.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Girma Ibrahim. I'm a researcher at International Water Management Institute. So this morning, I'll just give you a brief overview about the water storage assessment of the Shashe catchment, which is located in the Limpopo River Basin in Southern Africa. So I acknowledge DINWA and University of Botswana are working on this water storage assessment work. So just to start with, the Shashe catchment is 30,000 kilometers square in area, and it's shared by Botswana and Zimbabwe, and average annual rainfall range from about 200 to 600 millimeter per annum, which is really dry compared to other regions. Rainfall is highly seasonal, and about 95% of the rainfall occurs between October and April. And the river is highly favorable river, with a flow generally restricted to a few days of the year. However, the Shashe River is one of the largest.
Girma, I'm sorry, you're not flipping slides. Maybe just stop sharing, and I'll share from my side.
Okay. Make it full screen, please.
There you go.
Okay, thanks. So as I said, rainfall in the Shashe catchment is highly seasonal. About 95% of rainfall occurs between October and April. And the river is highly ephemeral river, or most of the rivers in the Southern Africa are really ephemeral rivers, generally flow to a few days or weeks of the year. But as I said, Shashe is one of the largest contributor in terms of flow to the larger Limpopo River basin. Geologically, about nearly 80% of the Shashe catchment is covered with hard rock, igneous, and metamorphic rocks. Next slide, Jonathan. Next. So the objective of this assessment is, our study is to assess the temporal and the spatial variability of both natural and man-made storage in the Shashe catchment. When we talk about natural, we consider like soil and aquifer, whereas man-made, we can have like dam or reservoir storage, but we also hybrid, which is more of sand dams in the Shashe catchment. So the key question we would like to answer here is how much the total water stored in the Shashe catchment, and how much storage in each storage options, and then how the temporal and spatial variability looks like. Next slide, Jonathan. So water storage option, the Shashe catchments, we have around 4 water storage options. We have sand dams, reservoirs, aquifers, and soil. However, currently the water management option, the storage planning option, is more focused on the reservoirs or dams. So there is no much considering other alternative or integrated thinking of the different integrated water storage options in the Shashe catchment. So the methodology that we follow to assess storage in the Shashe catchment, we use because it's different storage types, we use different approach to assess the storage in different water storage types. The first one is surface water storage. We use both remote sensing based, also time series data for dams or secondary data obtained from the countries. Sand dam storage, we used estimated full storage volume of sand storage based on the sand accumulation behind sand dam, and also storage properties, which is called specific yield. And when we come to soil and the groundwater storage, which is a bit difficult, so we use integrated SWAT mode flow model, which is calibrated in for this purpose for the Shashe catchment. Then from that, we obtain both soil and groundwater storage. However, we also compare this estimate with what's available remote sensing estimate. For example, soil moisture estimate from SWAT mode flow was compared with SMAP soil moisture estimate. Whereas we also compare this with the total water storage estimate based on the different approach with the GRACE total water storage estimate. Of course, GRACE is a large coarse resolution, but we also get a good correlation. So for just result 1, we have a dam reservoir on sand storage in the Shashe catchment. Currently, there are 10 large dams, the Shashe, with a full storage capacity of around 700 million meters cubed at full capacity. So there are 3 dams in Botswana and 7 dams in Zimbabwe. So the total storage is 700, but nearly the Decathlon dam, which is constructed in Botswana recently in 2011, accounts like 57% of the total storage, which is now the Decathlon dam is around 400 million meters cubed in capacity. When we come to the sand dam storage, we have around 30 sand dams in the Shashe catchment, all mostly constructed by the Badabani Trust, which are collaborating in this Nexus work. So the total water storage in the sand dam, which we estimated to be nearly 0.13 million meter cubed, but it's small, but it's really provide a very important source of water for people who are really living in the community, rural, far from the resources. So you can see on the right side where you can see typical sand dams in the Shashe and also water drawing mechanisms from the sand dams. On the left corner, you can see bottom corner, you can see the temporal variation of sand storage in the large dams, where we see in Botswana we have around 400 million meter cubed and above, whereas in Zimbabwe, which is 185. Next slide, Jonathan. Soil and groundwater storage. This is an estimate from the integrated SWOT mode flow model. So we can see on the left side, you can see soil moisture storage, monthly soil moisture storage. From January to March, we have, even including December, we have maximum soil moisture storage, where we have like maximum, the most is maybe 60 millimeter, where we get it in February. Also, especially on the right side, if you see, there is a high correlation of rainfall versus soil moisture availability. On the right side, you can see spatial variability of different seasons of the month. Groundwater storage is nearly positive between March to August. However, in the rest of the year, it's really declining. So this is an estimate. Mind you, groundwater storage in this case estimated the available storage or change in groundwater storage. But you can see also the spatial mean groundwater storage in Shashe catchment for 2015 to 2020, which results about 1.5 meter of water in the Shashe catchment spatially average. And this results around 43,000 million meter cubed. But all this water needs to be accessible. So what we are concerned about is the available water, which is really without affecting the ecosystem. You can't deplete all the groundwater, even if there is a storage. So you need to consider it's the hydraulic connection with surface water resources. And next slide. So I think this is the total water storage in Shashe catchment, the integrated, the whole. If you see on the top right corner, you can see soil moisture is the significant contributor for the total water storage in the Shashe. This is just usually people believe like that dam storage provide the largest amount, but you can see even if the total storage is 7,300 million meter cubed, 85% of the total storage coming from soil. And annual groundwater storage is nearly 440 million meter cubed. Mind you, this is the available storage without affecting other hydro connection with surface water. Otherwise, the full storage may be 43,000. We are not concerned about the maximum. All dam storage at full capacity, nearly 7,000 million meter cubed, which is like 10% of the total storage. If you see the monthly distribution, May to November, you can see on the right bottom side, you can see the long-term monthly average of the different storage types. You can see soil moisture. We can get soil moisture from January to maybe April, but after that you have like depleted soil moisture. Even in July, August, we don't have that much amount. So the most of like 80% of soil moisture available between May to November in the dam storage. But January to March is the maximum soil moisture. If you see the dam storage is more or less, it's like constant. You can say like it's available most of the time, and it provides the maximum soil water during the dry period. And also, if you see groundwater is very small, this is like this is because of low recharge, which is 7% of the annual rainfall, and also low yielding hard rock aquifer. And if you see the temporal variability, dam is more or less consistent, whereas soil and groundwater are shown to be more variable. So when we look at the aggregated water storage in sand dam, even if they are considered to be very small, but they provide useful water for the community living in rural and remote areas. Next slide, Jonathan.
Yeah, I think, Girma, thanks. I think maybe this is a nice slide to conclude it. And just maybe, as I would flag to DA to get ready, just to give everybody a touch of perspective on this, to remind them where we stood at the outset. I mean, the images you're seeing here are some of the first efforts, in our view, to put the water stores, I mean, the volumes of water storage in different storage types together in the same place, and also to consider their seasonal variation. So to me, this is kind of the crystallization of what we're trying to do, put them there, put them on the table, and allow these to be considered in planning. So I think, Girma, again, this is great work. I'm excited to see these results. And I propose that we stop here, and I'll hand over to DA to give an example from the Ramganga. So DA has been undertaking parallel work to Girma, but in a different basin. So DA Patparia is with the International Water Management Institute in our Delhi office. DA, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I hope my slide is visible to all.
Visible, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. So good morning, everyone. I'm Dev Bhatpuria. I'm working in EMI, and I'm presenting this work on Ramganga Basin on behalf of the team. So just jumping directly into it, like the Ramganga Basin itself, the Ramganga River itself is the first major tributary of the Ganga River within the Ganga Basin. And the Ramganga River itself is 595 kilometers in length with a basin area of 18,668 square kilometers, and the total rainfall on an average is around 1000 mm in the basin, but the maximum rainfall is received mostly in the northern part of the basin, which is the hilly Himalayan part, around 2200 mm, whereas in the lower confluence area, which is a plain area, it is around 800 mm. And the majority of the rainfall is received during the monsoon months, during the June to October, which accounts for almost 80% of the rainfall. And as per the WWF 2020 report, the annual regulated flow within the basin at the outlet is around 5.6 billion cubic meter BCM, and that is roughly around 2% of the Ganga's total water resource. And this is a very highly populated basin, and it is part of highly populated state of India, Uttar Pradesh, and that's why it is of a lot of importance. And this is a brief overview of the basin, whereas for the basin, like currently, like for the assessments for it's usually done for the surface water and the groundwater, both handled by the Ministry of Jal Shakti. For groundwater is CGWB, Central Groundwater Board, and so for surface water it is done by the CWC. So in our case, like to do the assessment, we used both surface water and groundwater assessment. First, let us jump into the surface water assessment. This was totally done using the remote sensing method, in which we use the Sentinel-1 data, which is a 10-meter data SAR data set, which can look through the cloud, so that we have all-weather data set, and to estimate the water level, as well as surface area, as well as the volume. For estimating volume, we have used the FABDM, which is a digital elevation model, as well as with the GloBathy data and maximum water depth for smaller water bodies to estimate the bathymetry. As you can see on the bottom left corner of this in this image, like along the transect, you can see that the original DEM value is basically flat. It is basically because the values in the DEM are usually masked out. So in order to generate that bathymetry, we use this method, and what you can see in the red is the improved DEM, which was used for the calculation. And also to estimate identify the water bodies, we used like a monthly water presence, which was annually binned, and so that over a 1 year, like what is the monthly water presence for this was done for year from 2019-2022 to identify which are the actual water bodies. Like as you can see in this in the map in center, like the blue indicates the places, the locations with water presence persistently throughout the year, that is from 8 to 12 months, whereas 1 to 2 is usually where water was present only for 2 months. Usually those are the farms, so we ignore those. Only those which had the presence of water for more than 6 to 8 months along with the surroundings, it was taken for the consideration as the water bodies. So in total, like the water bodies that you can see on the right is the total water bodies identified, and around 3000 water bodies were identified, but we didn't have the maximum depth and other information for all the water bodies. So for this study, we only use 644 water bodies. So what you are seeing results is based on that. So we did a time series estimation from 2019-2022, and what you can see on the right is the total volume estimated for the Ramganga Basin based on that. And from this, like for the 2020, you can see that the trend there, as well as there is a high variability in the basin storage. Like the volume reaches around the it's on from the peak, it goes to the 50% usually during the dry months, but it quickly refills as soon as the monsoon hits. And you can see with the rainfall, the pattern, there is an increase in the water level. Also, like this volume is basically contributed mainly by the larger reservoirs, as you can, larger water bodies, as we have I've shown in the classified, as well as you can see in the pie chart. Like the share of different categories shows the area, whereas the numbers represent the number of bodies identified in that category. So like the large water bodies contribute almost 70% of the area, but those are only 7, whereas the smaller water bodies are like around 500 to 650, and that is 461 and 171 for small and very small, and but those contribute just roughly 5% of the surface area in that. And what you can see on the left is the validation exercise that we had conducted for the large water bodies, for which we had a time series volume available through the CWC India website, and the results were quite convincing for us to move forward with these estimates. So that was about the surface water body. Now for the groundwater mapping, we use the CGW, which is the Central Groundwater Board data, because they do every few years they do a survey for the groundwater resource assessment along with the state government, in which at the sub-district level they collect different statistics, which are like annual replenishable groundwater resources, natural discharge during the non-monsoon season, net groundwater availability, and irrigation, domestic and industry, as well as the total draft, as well as the stage of groundwater development. And this data we had for this study, we had used the data from year 2020 for this assessment. And as you can see on the right, like overall the annual replenishable groundwater in the Ramganga basin is roughly good, with values around 104 MCM as per our estimates in this for each and every block. So this is about like individual storages, like how we can assess them together. We just roughly attempted that. So for that, like for integrating the storages, what you can see on the left are the statistics related to it. So this is for the whole basin for the year 2020. So like roughly for the surface water, like the total volume of water that was estimated in December 2020 was around 2,500 MCM, whereas the net annual gain, which is the annual, like every month, like from the previous month, how much is the gain or loss, that was estimated, and that total annual gain was around 675 MCM, whereas the loss was a loss, or we can say the usage of water was around 589 MCM. Similarly, for groundwater, we have the estimates for the whole basin. This was around for annual replenishable water, it was around 14,300 MCM, whereas net availability was around 13,000 MCM. So even for this analysis, since the groundwater data is available at sub-district level or block level, so we did our assessments for the surface water also at the same level to do the estimates. You can see the figures on the images on the right explaining like different status of the volume. So if you can see on the left side, like that shows the surface water gain, and along the top, like those are the large reservoirs or the large water bodies which dominate in the blue area within the left image, whereas the smaller water bodies are present along the plain region. So you can see there is a less volume of water as compared to in the upper areas. Similarly for groundwater, I have already explained. So how to use them both together, like along with like the total surface water gain along with the year-end volume and net groundwater availability can be a good indicator to know what is the carry forward water for the next year, and that can help us to estimate the storages or manage for do the proper storage assessment for the following year. So this was our
thank you very much, DA. I think we're about out of time. So yeah, that was great though. And again, to give a very bit of context, that was the second example now where we've done integrated storage assessments and then now presented results together. So yeah, so now we have two examples where we looked at this integrated storage assessments together. The first was from the Shashe, the second was from Ramganga, and then now it's over to Jenny Barone from the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences to guide a discussion around how we take those assessments and then move them towards improving planning and management. Jenny, can we hand over to you?
Thank you very much. And thank you to the presenters. So we will have three panelists here who have already worked with integrated storage assessments in practice and to try to develop them in their different landscape contexts. So I invite Kaushal Garg from ICRISAT, Marcus Hoffman from the Federation of Swedish Farmers, and Davison Saruchera from IUCN. And I'll give you each one a 2 minutes pitch to present your case, so we know exactly what your background, and then I will pay some questions, unless we get more questions from the audience who are with us online. Please, Kaushal, could you please pitch your talk? And Jonathan, would you get Kaushal's picture? Thanks.
Thank you, Jenny, for this opportunity. Thank you all. This is the case study of the Bundelkhand region. This is also part of the Uttar Pradesh. You know, this is the part of the Ganga basin. We worked with the government of Uttar Pradesh, and then government of Uttar Pradesh asked ICRISAT to develop the proof of concept. So we worked in the 22 villages covering 40,000 hectare area. These areas are suffering with the water scarcity issues, frequent drought and extreme events, and then farmers are having frequent crop failures. So to address those, a range of the natural resource management interventions were implemented, and then a range of the water storage structures are built. You can see those pictures over there. And there's a great impact because of these, because of when we see that the hydrology has changed, hydrological process has changed, almost of 200 millimeter of runoff which was going out, we have harvested about 80 millimeter to 90 millimeter on an average, and this has changed the scenario of the landscape. You can see that the groundwater table, which was about 20 meter down, has come up to 5 meter, and then bore wells, those were not functioning, has gone to the 20 wells were functioning, it has come to the 220 wells, and accordingly, large of impact you can see over there. And in this approach, we have followed the land resource inventory and as well as hydrology. And in this approach, we have a government of Uttar Pradesh have asked that how best they can use their funding, and then efficiency can be built. So all these interventions has helped in terms of the number of the innovations, in terms of the approach we followed, and in terms of the number of engineering designs we have implemented. And then you can see the change in the cropping pattern in the monsoon season, where the farmers were not able to take the crops, or they were taking the low value crops. It has increased to the high value crop. And also in the post-monsoon season, with the increased water availability, you can see 750 hectare of the land which was left fallow has brought it to the cultivation. And then overall income, if you see, there's a significant change in the overall income. It is about the 1.3 million USD. It has gone to the 3 million USD. So this is the overall change we have seen. And then we have seen that if we do the implementation at the landscape scale, and then if we do the implementation at the upland areas, we see that there is a significant change has happened at the midland as well as the downstream areas.
Thank you. Your case is very well developed. So I'll turn over to Marcus Hoffman, who is representative and sustainable and water advisory at the Federation of Swedish Farmers, representing more than 100,000 enterprises of farming in Sweden. And your case is a little bit different. You're actually at the starting point of trying to look at how do you make climate resilience in Swedish farmers, and what is the infrastructure needed? Marcus, would you like to tell us a little bit about your case?
Yes, thank you, Jenny, and all of you to invite me to this very interesting seminar. And we have been heavily invested in trying to get rid of water in Swedish farming for the last 150 years, and we have constructed an infrastructure to drain water that has a cost of between 100 and 115 billion Swedish crowns if we would establish that all now. Like Jenny said, we are only the beginning of starting to irrigate in a larger scale, and at present there is only infrastructure to allow about 5% of the Swedish farmland to be irrigated. And that's becoming a problem for us now when the climate changes. So we had a severe drought in 2018. And we had a second drought this year in May and June. So when we now summarize the crop failure, crop damage from these 2 years. The harvest loss sums up to about 16 billion Swedish crowns, and that's a lot of money for Swedish farmers. And we are usually a net exporter of cereals, but not this year. And in 2018, we had to import grain to feed the population. So we foresee quite large investments to have the possibility to irrigate more of our land in Sweden, but we also experience that it's quite costly for farmers to establish irrigation ponds and to fill them during the winter with a winter discharge. And the typical number for Sweden is 40 Swedish crowns per cubic meter of water stored. That's like €4 per cubic meters. And even though there is an investment support from the EU with 30% of the contribution, many Swedish farmers cannot afford to construct those irrigation ponds. And finally, we have a debt of maintaining drainage infrastructure as well. And this photo to the right, it's from my own small 70-hectare farm in the west of Sweden, where Martin, who drives the excavator, he lifts up about 35 centimeters of sediment, as you can see. And this ditch hasn't been maintained or cleaned since my father did that about 35 years ago. So there's about 1 centimeter per year accumulating of sediment. Might be interesting to know. So this is a glimpse of the Swedish situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus, and also for reminding that we have to manage both the flood in terms of looking at the storage, not just the actual storage for access. So I would like to invite our next speaker, who's actually very much aware of the flood and the flood function of storage in the landscape. Davison Satura from IUCN, you have a case in a much more humid tropical region, where you have been working on managing floods and using nature-based solutions to a big extent. And could you please explain a little bit more about the case, please? 2 minutes.
Thank you, Jenny, and greetings to speakers. Yes, we've been working in the Pumbwe-Sawebuza Basin since around 2012 as IUCN, sometimes with other partners. And most of our work really has been promoting nature-based solutions to mitigate floods and droughts. So this is a basin that is shared by Zimbabwe and Mozambique, and it is vulnerable to extreme weather events. So it's just alternating between drought and floods almost over the time for the past 14, 15 years. And this year has really brought some urgent questions and some interventions. Recently, there even was a cyclone. But the work that we do is mostly been around trying to promote nature-based solutions like maintaining ecological flows, also promoting what we call sustainable utilization of wetlands. And recently, we've gone into a big promotion of early warning systems for both floods and droughts in order to protect first the livelihoods and the socio-economic base for the communities. So while we are doing this, you can understand in this landscape where you get a cyclone, where you get floods, there's a lot of damage that happens every day, and governments have to respond. So both governments have actually been building dams in the basins. In fact, there's actually now been a spike in the number of planned dams. And these are focusing first on flood protection and second on water supply for both domestic supply for irrigation and farming and so forth. Also, especially in Zimbabwe now, there's massive groundwater mining. We even have a situation where every ward, which is a section of a district, at least there to be 2 new boreholes being drilled almost every week, something like that. So the massive groundwater mining is necessary because of the drought. And when you look at this and how vulnerable the community then is, the question we really want to ask now is, will nature-based solutions be enough to really ring-fence the livelihoods of people, to really protect the economic base of the populations, and then the work that we do? Because we really try to work with the ecological integrity of the basin. The promotion of infrastructure has not been at the forefront, as this is seen as anti-NBS, but at the same time, it is happening. So in a sense, the question when you ask, is there integrated water storage? There is, but it's not exactly centrally planned. It's not exactly institutionalized. It's not exactly coordinated. It is happening more by default than by planning. And in this case, this landscape is just from the Transboundary Water Commission, which came into existence in May. And this brings a perfect opportunity to start thinking about introducing integrated planning in here. But if you want to really talk about integrated water storage, then some questions then come in here, especially the role of the partnership that should happen between the interventions that promote nature-based solutions and the interventions that try to build resilience using infrastructure. Mobilizing the correct investment is important, but you also really realize the value of basin approaches. This is a transboundary basin, and like most of the transboundary basins that we do have in SADC, there is not as much harmonization as we like to see all the time. I'll stop there for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Davis, and thank you for our panelists. And we just realized that this is really a topic of great interest, just irrespective of where you are, and something that we're struggling in all our different landscapes and climates. And I will just take one of the questions from the meeting chat, because it relates also to Kaushal's example, where they really showed how when water was available, they could shift the cropping patterns and thereby getting more income to the farmers. And the question in the chat, Marcus, do you change the agricultural cropping patterns considering the availability of water due to severity of droughts? Have Swedish farmers changed their patterns due to the climates that we're seeing now?
Cropping system has changed, Jenny.
No, sorry, we know that the cropping has, you showed us clearly that it has changed in your case, but the question is for Marcus Hoffman, if Swedish farmers are also changing their cropping patterns? Sorry.
They're not changing the cropping pattern yet, because the market is still demanding the same kind of cultivation, and people want to eat the same type of food as they've always been eating. So there is no substantial change in cropping patterns, but some farmers cultivate more grass because grass is more resistant to drought, and they try to save grass from one year to another as silage. So that's a minor change, but maybe something will come. We'll see.
Thank you, Marcus. I will just ask you one quick question to all our panelists. Could you just say shortly, in the infrastructure development, who are the ones paying for these infrastructure development? Kaushal, in your case, how did the farmers contribute, or who was paying for the change storage structures?
So Jenny, here are the two things. One, the government has supported this project, and then we have built the structure. But in fact, there is already infrastructure available. For example, like farmers have number of the bore wells and then dug wells. Those is the private investment is there already. And then because they have made their investment, but it is still not working. So with little investment of the government, those infrastructure has become more useful. So that way, this is the investment from both government as well as from the private side. Another thing is that if you look at the landscape treatment, like the investment is relatively much low, like the $300 per hectare, whereas compared to the irrigation irrigation infrastructure development, where the $10,000 per hectare is the investment cost. So you can see the comparison over there. And in addition to that, there is a lot of participation of the farmers when we work together with the farmers. So there's an institutional building, and then farmers have invested this significant amount of their time, their wisdom has come here. So these are all the investments.
Thanks. Farmers play a big role in participating in providing investments, even if government is providing some of that. I understand. Yeah, Marcus, you mentioned the price of investments needed. What was it? €4 per cubic meter of water. Is this both for the drainage and the storage structure, or is there a separation? And which part of this is now farmers providing?
The €4 per cubic meter is only for water storage when it comes to establishing new ponds for saving irrigation water, and typical pond in Sweden is like 100,000 cubic meter large, and it's being filled during the winter flow. And about the investment, Sweden is a part of the EU, and the farmers have a possibility to get 30% in investment support. So 70% has to be paid by themselves. And we see since the draft in 2018 that much more ponds have been established. But it has been established mostly on large farms because they're the ones that they can afford to pay the 70% of own investment. So we are thinking about how should climate adaptation also be possible for small or medium-sized farmers in Sweden.
Thanks for bringing in that equity perspective. Davies, what's the case in your case in Pungwe? Who is paying for the investments in your case?
So this is two-pronged. On one side, you have the big infrastructure driven by public funds, because government, they have to respond to flood issues and protect livelihoods. At the same time, also trying to promote irrigated agriculture at small scale level. So that's one side. And then on the commercial farming side, you have farmers investing on site on their own farms in a lot of storage. These are private dams, sometimes underground storage, especially with farmers that grow sugar, tea, and wheat. So it's just between those two, and any other support that comes through ICPs or NGOs that rarely touches on infrastructure.
Thanks, Davies. So these were snapshots on how integrated storage action could happen in different cases from different climate zones. And I just want to thank the panelists and of course our presenters, and I will hand over to Jonathan and Stefan for this closure of the session. Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks, Jenny. I unless I'm miscalculating, I think we still have a couple minutes, and I had added one in the chat. Maybe if I could just throw one more there, particularly to Davis. Because I think a lot of the basins where Nexus Gains, the program that I flagged at the outset, operate in are actually in transboundary basins. And I liked how Davis was kind of contextualizing integrated storage in the Pungwe and Save quite a bit in the transboundary context there. So I just wonder, Davis, if you do have any thoughts on like how the transboundary nature of that basin affects integrated storage planning. Does it help to bring some of the alternative storage measures or options more to the table, or do you think that actually pushes focus more towards traditional options? Thanks.
Actually, it has been a double-edged sword, not just in the Pungwe, but other basins that we work in. So when you have storage happening at a transboundary scale, it can actually result in competition between the member states to store as much water as the riparian can. So you will need a lot of, comprehensive basin planning with a lot of guidelines and very, very reliable data exchange to build the level of trust that allows people to do this storage in good faith on both sides of the basin. And then the storage then has to be coordinated. Unfortunately, we don't have all the platforms that we need to make sure that the storage is coordinated at this point in time. And I think that's one of the areas that I think needs a lot of investigation, how to really do that at transboundary level and what you need in terms of planning, in terms of the institutions. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, interesting. I mean, again, one of the things that I've noted is more conventional options, like for example, large dams are more concentrated, whereas some of the more alternative options might be more distributed, which would require more coordination and effort, which may not always motivate large countries to engage all around. But noted, interesting points, Davis. And now we are getting close to the end. So I will I'll ask maybe Stefan if he wants to give some final remarks in the last 2-3 minutes, and then we can close. Could I ask Stefan Uhlenbrook from the World Meteorological Organization to give us some perspective on what was presented and discussed today? Thanks. Okay, maybe we've lost.
Now it works.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Stefan. Sorry.
Hi, Jonathan. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. The organizers had to do that. Also cannot switch on the video, but that's fine. Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks to all the presenters. You know, this was really interesting, very inspiring. I'm currently at Stockholm Water Week, and this was the most technical and inspiring session I heard for some time. So, well done. It was really interesting to see the latest developments of Nexus Gains, something I've been involved in the early days. And I really enjoyed the case studies presented for the groundwater focused one, as well as surface water focused one, as well as the others in different hydroclimatic regions. In these closing remarks, in my 2 minutes which I have left, I would like to think a little bit about with you. So what's next, or what does that mean? I really appreciate the work, and I think you are collecting the necessary data and information to really go the next steps. And for me, working at World Meteorological Organization, to really scale that and bring that to the attention of member states that they heavily invest in it, it needs guidelines and a synthesis of first a synthesis of how do you assess storage, how do you assess storage needs, and what are the solutions and how do they function. I think you have a lot because you work in different hydroclimatic regions, but it needs to go for us to really have a technical regulations. Technical regulations are something that the member states agree to, and then they actually, if there's the agreement on certain action, they actually are obliged to implement it also. So to develop with UN agencies, and I think in this case the World Meteorological Organization and the hydrology program might be the logical link. It would be quite powerful if in the coming years we could work towards technical guidelines or even technical regulations to really make that legally more functioning or even binding, you know, at the end, because I really see this is a key solution for climate change adaptation and to address all the needs that William brought in at the beginning when he demonstrated the relevance of the topic. To do that, we need a technical synthesis, but also I think we heard a lot about the technological and knowledge part today, and the readiness for investments is probably there. What we didn't speak about today is the readiness when it comes to governance and institutions, or how ready are we for really implementing that at larger scale and scale that. I think that's something which probably Nexus Gains and maybe other partners who were speaking today really want to work on. So I believe so. The readiness from a technology point of view, but also from a social governance institutional point of view, need to be further advanced to really have technical regulations which allow also probably World Bank, William might want to speak to that, and other donors and investors to have more clarity on associated risks and make it more investable. I think that's something we should focus on in the coming years while continuing all the good work you're doing. With this, thank you so much. It was highly inspiring. I'm looking forward to work with you maybe on this synthesis and working towards technical guidelines in the years to come. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Stefan. And thanks, everybody. So on behalf of all the organizers and participants, I think we want to thank everybody for joining this session. And with that, we'll close. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.